Hey everyone, it's the Nitty Professor here with Ari to ask the question, did you know that we as knitters, crocheters, quilters, fibercrafters, sewists, we have superpowers? That's what we're going to get into today, the superpowers. And I'm going to talk about knitters because guess what? I'm knitting and I'm the Nitty Professor, but please transfer my claims to your crochet work, your needlepoint, your sewing, your crafting, your woodworking, your gardening, etc. So as knitters and crafters, one of our first superpowers is the power to make. We live in a culture that's dominated by buying stuff. I'm guilty of it. I buy stuff a lot. Did I buy anything today? Not yet, but I'm thinking about it. I may buy blueberries. Kind of ran out. And I need cat litter. And I can't make cat litter. I mean, theoretically I could, but I'm much better at making socks. But yeah, the power to make things, that's huge. That's like our human destiny, you know, man the maker, homo faber. And it'd be cool if there were more superheroes who, like, I mean, Spider-Man makes webs, cool, you know. Frozone makes ice. But yeah, the power to make things is extraordinary because we're dominated by a culture that's all about using up resources, exhausting resources, transforming them in a way that's arguably wasteful and that feeds greed, etc. But we can produce something useful, beautiful, and individual, something creative, just with our own hands and our own brain. And how can you be more independent than that? Right? You know, you can make your own food, you can make your own clothes, you can make your own furniture, you can make your own world. I mean, I make my own stories, you know? So as makers, that's a really major superpower of being a knitter. How about the power to repair? That's also a huge power. I mean, we now live in a society where people are crying for the right to repair. We can repair whatever we want as long as it's, you know, something that falls into our craft. I mean, I've repaired furniture. You should see the repairs I've done on my table. They're a little bit wonky. I think it involves bungee cords. But yeah, as knitters, we can repair, we can mend, we can darn things, and make garments last so that we don't have to throw it away. Just because it's damaged doesn't mean we have to throw it away. It doesn't mean we want to hoard it, per se. But yeah, we don't have to keep buying and buying and buying if we can take what we have and extend its life by mending, reinforcing. Maybe you have to unravel and remake a little bit, you know. And it's kind of like a mindset. I mean, it's a superpower that is metaphorical. So, heck, we can apply it to the climate. If we repair the climate, that would be really big. Our grandchildren would love us. They would really appreciate that. As knitters and crocheters, anyone who works with wool, alpaca, yak, maybe cotton, we have the power to give warmth. And again, it's metaphorical, right? You can give a knitted gift and it conveys warmth in terms of keeping a person's body temperature where it should be, but also emotional warmth, spiritual warmth. And that can be an extraordinarily powerful thing. A hand-knit hat, pair of socks, blanket, hand-knit sweater tells you your commitment that you're making to the other person because of the hours, of the energy, of the time, and the love that you invested in it. And there's a place for gift cards, you know. I mean, there have been times when I'm like, what am I going to get? What, even making, you know, it's like, I don't know. I'm probably just going to resort to a gift card, and there's a place for that. But for the knit-worthy subject who really understands, who gets the time that goes into what you make for them, and, you know, arguably the thought that you aimed their way while you were making, that it can be a really awesome source of connection to give that warmth, an expression of human care, even if, or especially if you give it to a stranger, someone you don't even know. Another superpower, we have the power to slow things down. And in the society that is sort of epitomized by the proverbial rat race, that's a pretty strong power. I'm feeling a movie coming on, maybe a novel. Should write about the super knitter. And they just come in and they see, I don't know, some people frantically bustling about in a big office and everybody's blood pressure is 150 over 100 and one guy's on the floor having a heart attack and they just like get out their knitting needles and they cast this like knitted web of slowness on everyone. And then they're like, yeah, we should have done this earlier. But we have the power to slow things down and the power to resist instant gratification. That instant gratification, that can be a real draw. Even when it comes to buying yarn, let's just be honest. But this is anything but instant gratification. Now granted, this sock I've been working on for just a couple weeks. It's probably bigger than a couple of the ones I've been working on for a couple years. But we won't. That's not a superpower. That's yeah. We won't talk about that. But in any case, yeah. Progress one step at a time in a world that screams for immediate results. That's definitely a superpower. And related to that, we have the power of patience. One of my sweaters took 3 years to make. I have needle points hanging up on my wall that took longer than that. In fact, I have a couple that when I do get them done, I could probably chalk it add up the number of years, and it would probably add up to somewhere around 50. But hey, I can wait it out. You know, I know I'm going to finish them at some point. That's patience. And I've had a little debacle lately with a UPS package that I sent from my sister's house when I went to Atlanta. And I've been really impatient trying to get results on even just making a claim, Very frustrated. I think I even cussed at the AI bot. Didn't appreciate that. It was like, you should treat me with more respect. I'm like, you're a robot, and you just are, jerking me around. But in any case, patience is a superpower, and when I'm a knitter, so when I put on my knitting costume, just grab those needles, then I understand patience. And most of the time, I am able to apply that virtue in other situations, except not with UPS. There are exceptions to every rule. However, yeah, the power of patience. Another thing that's a superpower for knitters, for crocheters, for sewists, is the power to make mistakes survivable. So one of the things I like to talk to my students about was failing forward, because I generally like to push them and compel them to work, which is getting harder and harder in the age of AI. But it's okay to make mistakes. Especially my language classes, I'm like, dude, I don't need perfect French. What are you trying to present perfect French to me for? They think they're supposed to. And in knitting, I've seen people are like, oh, you dropped a stitch. Oh, well, no, I have stuff that's wonky that I made, and I love wearing it. And yeah, it's survivable, definitely survivable. Mistakes you can get over that hump, and you can acknowledge that you're capable of mistakes, and that it's okay. Then that humility is a real virtue. And I would be interested in how many of you regard your crafting, your sewing, your knitting, maybe your music, your woodworking as something that has offered you opportunities to discover your inner humility. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. Don't hesitate to share, any examples. It'd be kind of interesting. I'm sure we can all relate. Another thing that's cool about knitting, and I'd say anything, especially like spinning, something that acts as a kind of a meditative craft, is that you have the power to turn your anxiety and your stress into actual action, making something that is purposeful. And many of us, especially these days, with prices where they are, with the state of the world where it's at, with just this feeling of being on the brink all the time, we are definitely anxious. And if we can turn that anxiety into, a meditative form of resistance, then we're definitely turning it into action. And especially if it's collective, if we can gather together. Just had a nice little gathering of 6 or 7 fiber aficionados at a friend's house the other day. And we all just sort of immediately fell into this groove of friendship, of conviviality, it was really neat. I passed around my spinning wheel maker book, and I sold a copy, and I'm looking forward to the action. But yeah, turning anxiety into a resource, like mining it. What if we could mine our anxiety like solar power? Now that would be a superpower. But at the very least, we can mine it, and we can create beautiful knitted garments, items, toys, etc. things that comfort us. And that really is a superpower. We also have the superpower of creating community, just like I was referring to about getting together with your friends over a shared hobby. And there are a number of hobbies that lend themselves to that. Music is one of the first that comes to my mind, just because I'm in a band, I'm in an orchestra, and that's a huge sense of community. In fact, we're probably going to do a musical this fall. And when you do a musical together and you're in the pit 3 hours a night, 10 days in a row, you really sense community. But I sense community with my Fiber Guild. These people, I've met them now month after month for years. And we had some pretty free-willing discussions about the state of the world, and it was very cathartic. And that community just made us all feel better. Honestly, if you, I ran into a knitter on a plane. Perfect stranger. That was literally the only thing we knew we had in common. And I just turned to her and I was like, looks like you're knitting one of those national parks hats. Guess what she did? She smiled. And we chatted up there for 15 minutes. It's like we have a capacity to turn strangers into acquaintances at the drop of a needle. And sometimes, she was going her way, I was going my way. But depending on the circumstances, you can turn an acquaintance into friends. I mean, I've seen occasional people in the student center at the university knit or crochet and then gotten to know them. And then, every time I see them, it's like, yep, I've got a pal. You can sort of transform your helpless waiting into some kind of purposeful activity, especially in the airport, maybe in the doctor's office. Yep, it's a superpower. And another power that's maybe even, community is pretty big, but preserving memory, that's another really big superpower too. Just by doing with my hands what my mom did with her hands and her mom did with her hands, and et cetera, et cetera. It's like you have these, shared brain waves. It's a really cool thing. And what if you recreate patterns? For example, my aunt, I've told y'all this story, she used to make these really neat intarsia Christmas stockings for all of us, and the last person in my family to get one from her was my eldest son, and my twins didn't get one. And boy, that would be such a cool way to exert this superpower, is to, I got the pattern, I found it, to make these stockings for any grandchildren that I have. In fact, I really ought to try to reproduce the pattern. I've just never done intarsia, but I really need you guys to inspire me to invoke my superpower of recreating these Christmas stockings, so I can keep that memory alive, keep that legacy alive, keep that family history alive. And there are other ways that, I even have my mom's baby blanket, and that, I'm not sure if it was crocheted or knitted. I should get it out and show it to y'all. But, I should wash it up, see what happens. Could be that her great-grandchild could use her same baby blanket. Wouldn't that be cool? And sometimes maybe there's a reminder of a certain period of life when something was knit, memory that's attached to it. There are all kinds of things you can craft. Like, I have quilts that I've made from quilt blocks that were made by a great aunt that I never even met. And now it's like a quilt that we have lying around that we can use on our beds. And just sort of even remember that person that, is part of our ancestry. Sort of, it's like resurrecting her memory just through what she made and what a friend of mine helped to make in concert with that, because it was a friend of mine who turned the quilt block, the top, into an actual quilt that we can use. So talk about community, it's like stitching things together. Here's a power that we could also associate with knitting, depending on, how we exercise the craft, the power to challenge stereotypes. Knitting can undermine some of our assumptions about gender, about class, and about masculinity. I love breaking those stereotypes in my books, as you can tell. Volume 1, I start right off with a heterosexual male knitter, and it was just so fun to write about him, and then to sort of explore and find out that he's anything but alone. There are a lot of male knitters out there. In fact, when I did that tour of the store in Georgia, turned out that there were any number of male knitters who related to the people owning and working at the store and coming to their regular meetings. I think they might have been weekly to knit and crochet together. So all these stereotypes that we have, a lot of them they're kind of, they're very restricted because, for example, the idea of male knitters, there's certain cultures where men were the only ones who did it, or where, of course, men would knit, back in the day, maybe, a couple of years ago or whatever. Other stereotypes, I'm writing about a blind knitter, for a while I was like, boy, are people going to buy this? And then I went to the website for one of my courses in my certificate program for visual impairments. It's called the Braille Authority of North America. And I got a sign from heaven when the first document that showed up on the website when I clicked on it was updated standards for brailing patterns for knitters. And it was like cables and color work. And I was like, yes, you are preaching to the choir. So going to break a lot of stereotypes. And book 5 is going to come out in probably about maybe 5 or 6 weeks. And we can also break stereotypes regarding what constitutes work, because admittedly, there were times when people had to knit and they didn't have a choice. It's really interesting to look at the history of how people would take their knitting and their spinning especially, and they would just, if they had a moment when they were plowing or when they were planting, and they could just, take a little break and whip out their drop spindles, and it would just like always be with them. It was definitely work. And, most of us nowadays, we do it for leisure, but there's still a connection. And there are a lot of stereotypes that are involved in crafting, needle crafting, stitching, that need to be broken, but also that need to be studied, So challenging stereotypes, that's a pretty useful superpower. Here's one that may be a little bit more important, is the power to resist disposability. When I knit something, so like right now, I have socks on that I know they're going to get holes. Now, I made them about 3 years ago. Am I just going to throw them away? No, because it took me months to knit them. So I'm probably going to try to find a way to mend them. Even though I technically haven't learned darning yet, I'm going to learn it. I'm going to learn it because I understand the value of that expensive Irish yarn that I bought to go into the socks. I understand how much labor I put into it, how many hours I spent making those socks. I understand the importance of trying to repair them so that that labor does not just go down the drain like the labor that goes into many of the garments that we buy at, say, Walmart or whatever. We don't even think about the people who make those clothes. And yet they're there, but we regard them as disposable. But when you make it yourself, when, I've sewed a number of shirts, I'm not just going to throw them away if they get a rip, because I know how much labor I put into it and how carefully I chose the fabric and how I worked to make the pattern fit me and all that kind of thing. I'm going to repair it. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to make sure it lasts as long as it possibly can. And if something goes wrong, I can probably still find a use for the fabric, right? I have a couple of garments that my brother made that not only do they not fit anybody, they don't align with anybody's fashion anymore because they were made like in the 70s. But guess what? The fabric could be reused. And that's the mentality of a fiber crafter. That is a superpower. It's like a rebellion against the throwaway economy. And it's a very important rebellion. I can also have the power to create something that is unique. I bet nobody else besides me is combining this Portuguese yarn with this Canadian yarn for the toe. Nobody's going to have a sock like this pair of socks that I'm making right now. And even if you follow a pattern, you're probably going to change it, right? You're going to tweak something. You might change the size. You might change the shape. You might change the finishing. You might even change some of the color work. You can make decisions about the fiber, the color, the texture, what yarn you use. You can modify it. There are all kinds of things that you can do to make it your own. And if you create your own patterns, which we know you will, right? Then your superpower of making unique items, especially for you or whoever receives them, that it makes it even greater. So, takes a certain degree of confidence. And if you know what you're capable of and what your superpowers are, as a knitter, you're going to have that confidence. And lastly, let's take a look at the superpower of connection. And again, let's think about this metaphorically. When you take a single strand of yarn and you link the whole thing up in a bunch of knots into this huge web of connected stitches that ends up being a useful garment, that's like magic. That's a huge metaphor for what we can do with each other as human beings, with the world at large, with the creatures that inhabit the world, with the resources. You know, if we think about, well, in my church, we talk about the interconnected web of existence. And we could also think about the interconnected knitted garment of existence. When we stitch together clothes, socks, we can also apply that to stitching together relationships, friendships, mutual aid, and networks to effectuate things like combating climate change, combating economic injustice, etc., etc. So I think it's really valuable, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the metaphor of stitching, knitting, and superpowers, and how else we can apply it metaphorically. So look forward to your thoughts. I hope you guys have a great start to your week, because yes, it is Monday. We'll talk soon. Ciao.